William Lawrence, who's a professor of political science and international affairs at the American University. Welcome to the programme. Great to have you here. This conflict is now in its ninth consecutive day. We're entering the 10th night. How much longer will this go on before we see a ceasefire?
Well, what everyone is trying to avoid is the 7-week version like we saw in 2014, and to limit this to days rather than weeks. There was some rumors over the weekend of a ceasefire in the making. There was another rumor of a humanitarian pause today or tomorrow. And then there are rumors of a full ceasefire coming into effect on Thursday. I don't think any of these are true, but what they do indicate is that the U.S. is pushing very hard behind the scenes for a deal this week rather than next week. And even down to the micro level of Defense Department and Ministry of Defense conversations about where the Israeli army goes, and intelligence conversations about what actually is a current threat to Israel or isn't. So those institutional relationships and dialogues are ongoing to try to convince the Israelis that any political gain that Netanyahu might be seeking because of the political troubles that he's in, identified by your guest, are offset by the reputational hit and security, increased security problems that Israel faces. And maybe it's just better to end this as soon as possible.
And, you know, you say the U.S. is pushing behind the scenes. You're a former U.S. Diplomat, and that seems very interesting, given how President Biden has not been very vocal to actually end the fighting.
Yeah, he made very many mistakes along the way, but I think all this discussion of Asia is sort of a straw man. The real issue is that the Middle East policy was focused on Iran, on Yemen, on Iraq, on Syria, on Turkey and the Eastern Med and Libya, even more than Israel-Palestine. And as your guest just before me said, or was that your correspondent, you know, that was just not on the agenda. Over the last 11 days, the Biden administration has moved from we're not interested really in doing much except mitigating the negative effects of the Trump administration policies to we actually have to develop a policy here. And so now the Biden administration, which was AWOL on this issue, is talking about a ceasefire, is talking about a truce, is making statements about expulsions and settlements, is talking about Palestinian rights, and you know, back on the table are longer-term solutions because of this new progressive caucus in the Democratic Party. And let me just add to what the person just before me said, which is that the real change in U.S. domestic politics is not the protests. We saw those in 2014, and not the progressive angst within the party. We had more of that now, but that's not the important thing, I think. The important thing is that the majority of the Democratic Party in both the Senate and the House are now pushing for a ceasefire and pushing for greater defense for Palestinian lives and livelihoods, including quite conservative senators and congresspeople very close to Netanyahu and Israel, like Meeks, head of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and Menendez, former head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and very powerful in this area, and Chuck Schumer, who have all changed their rhetoric quite dramatically in the last 2 days and started discussing about new conditionality for U.S. assistance to Israel. And so all of that is quite important, because if the middle of the Democratic Party and the majority of it is moving against Biden on this issue in order to engage much more, then we're going to see a greater likelihood of real changes in contrast to what happened after 2014.
Thank you for pointing out those real changes within the Democratic Party. Appreciate all your analysis. Thank you so much, William Lawrence.